Hi everyone, and welcome to my channel. Today I'm kicking off the Christmas season with 40 of my favorite Christmas decor DIYs that I've done so far here on my channel. Keep in mind this is a combination of a lot of the projects put together into one, so they will be labeled a little bit out of order. I really hope you enjoy and get lots of inspiration for this holiday season. Now let's get started. For the first project today, I'm using one of these unfinished wood frames from Hobby Lobby. This one is 13 by 9.5. And then the first thing I'm going to be doing to the frame is painting on a wood stain. The one I'm using is the Varathane stain in the color Charred Wood. I painted it on around all of the edges of the frame and then just took a cloth and wiped the remaining stain off. And I did stain the entire back of this as well, so that it would have a nice finished look all around. Then I'm going to be painting the entire inside of my frame with my Waverly chalk paint in the color Plaster, and I did just one quick coat of this. Once that was dry, I'm using this Merry Christmas stencil that came in a pack of stencils from Amazon, and I will have those linked down in my description box. As you can see here, the stencil is a little bit larger than my frame, but my words still fit. So what I'm going to do is just cut the two sides of the stencil down a little bit so that my stencil fits perfectly inside of my frame. Then I'm just getting it centered, and then I'm using some painter's tape at the top and the bottom of the stencil to hold it into place so that it doesn't move around while I'm painting it. What I did notice about this stencil is one of the stripes at the bottom wasn't cut all the way on the stencil, so I just had to pull it down a little bit and use some painter's tape to hold it into place so that my stripe at the bottom would be exactly the same as the stripe that I'm going to be painting at the top. I did use some more of my tape to just tape over the leaves here so I don't accidentally get a different color on them that I'm going to be painting my words Merry Christmas. Then I started to stencil my stripes. The color I'm using is from Folk Art, and it is chalk paint in the color Rich Black, and I'm using a Dollar Tree stencil brush to apply the paint. But I didn't realize that I was going to be getting my black paint onto the sides where I had painted it with my plaster color. So I did end up going back and placing some more painter's tape around the edges so that I didn't get any more of that black paint on my plaster color. So I just painted the stripes, and then once I had those painted, I moved on to my Merry Christmas words. Those I used the Folk Art chalk paint in the color Tuscan Red, and then I also did the berries in the center of the leaves with that same Tuscan Red color. And then for the leaves, I'm using Folk Art paint once again, and the color I'm using is in the color Antique Green. And of course, I had to paint my bottom stripes the same color as I did my top stripes, which was in the Rich Black color. And then once all of the paint was dry, I removed all of my painter's tape from around my stencil, and then I also removed my stencil. And where I had that little mess up with the black paint on the plaster color, I did just go back and touch that up a little bit. And that was the last step for this really quick and easy project. I already had all of the materials to create this, and I just think it looks so high-end and really cute, and it's a nice addition to my Christmas decor this year. Now moving on to the second DIY today. For this one, I am going to be using two of these like fence posts. You can get them in a pack for I believe about $6 at Lowe's. I'm using two of them for today's project, and I first started by painting both of them front and back with my plaster color chalk paint from Waverly, and I only did one coat of this paint. Once that paint was dry, I wanted them to have a little bit of a distressed look, so I took my Java colored paint from Folk Art on a Dollar Tree stencil brush, and I dry brushed it around all of the edges, and then also just a little bit on the flat surfaces of the post as well. Then I'm going to be using these dowel rods. These ones I did get from Hobby Lobby, and I cut them down a little bit. They are 19.5 inches, and then I painted them with that same Java colored paint. Once the paint was dry, I used some sandpaper to just give them a really distressed, chippy look. For this project, I'm also going to be using some of these wood toy wheels. These do come in a pack of several of them from Hobby Lobby. I'm using 2 of them and I'm painting them with that same Java colored paint. And again, once the paint was dry, I just used some of my sandpaper to sand them a little bit and give them that rustic distressed look that I'm going for. Then it was time to start putting everything together. I put my wheels on my dowel rods a few inches down, and then since they weren't super tight and secure, I just used a little bit of hot glue around the dowel and then moved my wheel up so that it was over top of the glue and would attach to my dowel rod. And then I did the same thing to the second one. I just made sure that I was placing the wheel in the exact same spot I did the first one. Next, I'm taking my fence posts or pickets, not sure really what you want to call these, but I'm placing them in an X and then I'm just hot gluing those 2 together. You could use nails if you wanted them to be a little bit more secure, but I'm just using the hot glue today. And then I am placing my dowels onto my fence posts. I'm just using some hot glue to attach them, and I'm just placing the hot glue in all of the areas where the dowels will be actually touching the fence posts so that I have them glued down pretty well. Now I'm going to be adding some greenery. This greenery that I'm using here is from Hobby Lobby, and it is the most realistic greenery that I've found, and I haven't been able to find any more of it. I'm on the search for it because I love it so much. But what I ended up doing was just hot gluing several pieces of it right in the center of my fence posts underneath my dowels. And I just continued to do that until, like I said, I had several pieces. And then I wanted to use some different colors and different textures of greenery. So I'm cutting some of this off of stems that were from Hobby Lobby last year and just again, hot gluing those around the center of my posts. And then I also ended up adding some with some sparkles on them. This one that I'm using here is from Dollar Tree. Again, just cut small pieces of it off and hot glued them down. And I did want to have a pop of color, so what I ended up using were these berries that come on a stem. These are from Hobby Lobby, and then again, just hot glued those down right in the center. To add a little bit of extra detail, I used this rusty bell that I had in my craft stash, and I wanted to attach it right in the center of my post, so I just used some hot glue to do that. And then I thought it would be super cute to add some pine cones, so I used 2 of these mini pine cones from Dollar Tree, and I just hot glued them around my bell. For the last little detail, I did end up using some of these sticks from this natural brush pack from Hobby Lobby. I just cut some of the sticks out and then I ended up just hot gluing them at the very top of my greenery. Here are my faux decorative skis. I think these turned out so cute and they were really easy to do. They look super high end and really didn't cost that much at all to make these. I know if I were to buy something like this in a retail store, they would cost way more than what it took for me to make them. Now I'm moving along right on into DIY number 3. For this one, I'm going to be using a 2-inch cube. I believe this one came from either Michael's or Hobby Lobby. And then the first thing I'm going to be doing to it is painting it with my Java colored paint from Folk Art. And I just did 1 coat of this paint. Once the paint was dry, I took some sandpaper and I distressed the entire cube to give it that rustic look that I'm going for this entire video. And then once I had that all sanded down, I did end up using one of these thicker dowels and I cut this one down to about 4 1/4 inches. I painted it with that same Java colored paint. Once the paint was dry, I did the same thing with the sandpaper. I just sanded it down to give it a really rustic look. For this project, I'm using one of these distressed star ornaments that came in a pack of, I believe, 4 from Hobby Lobby. And then also this berry garland from Dollar Tree. I'm wrapping it around itself a few times and I'm forming it into a circle to create a wreath. Once I had the wreath created, I wanted to add a little bow at the top, and I'm using jute to do that. I did 2 jute strands together to form my bow, and then I hot glued my wreath to the center of my star, and then I'm adding my bow to the very top of my wreath with some hot glue, and I did cut down the ends a little bit because they were a little bit too long. Next, I'm taking the dowel that I had painted and I am attaching it to the back of my star using some hot glue, and I'm just making sure that it's nice and centered. And then I'm hot gluing that dowel in the center of my cube. Then to add a little bit of detail, I'm using some greenery pieces that I had in my stash. I'm just hot gluing those on the very bottom of my dowel on top of my cube. And then I thought it would be super cute to add one of these mini pine cones from Dollar Tree right at the very bottom of my dowel on the top of my cube. Next, I'm using these bead letters to spell out the word Noel, and I strung them onto a piece of jute. After I had them all strung on, I did make sure that I had a knot on each end of my word Noel so that the beads wouldn't move around. I then cut off the long jute pieces and I hot glued my bead word right in the center of my berry wreath. Here is my piece all finished. I think it turned out really good. It was super easy to do, and it's the perfect accent piece to add to either a tabletop or a tiered tray. Next is DIY number 4. For this project, I'm using this unfinished wood truck from Hobby Lobby. It is from the Woodpile brand and it was $4.99, but I believe I paid 30% off of that price. The first thing I'm going to be doing to my truck is painting the base of the truck and around the wheels with my Tuscan red chalk paint from Folk Art. I only had to do 1 coat of this paint, and then for the wheels of the truck, I am using my rich black chalk paint from Folk Art, and then for the center of my wheels, I'm just going to be using a paint pen for this. This is a paint pen from Hobby Lobby, and it's in the color white. Then for the bed of the truck, I wanted it to look kind of like real wood, so I used my Waverly chalk paint in the color hazelnut, and I just kind of dry brush this color all over the bed of the truck just to give it more of that realistic wood look. Then I'm using this mini Merry Christmas ornament that came from Walmart. I believe I got this one last year, but it was a little bit too large to place on the side of my truck. So I ended up doing is just using my utility knife to cut the ends of the ornament off. I just scored over them a few times and then I was able to just snap that thin wood. And then once it was all cut down, I used hot glue on the back of it to hot glue it on the side of my truck. Then of course I needed to add a tree to my truck, so this one here I'm using is from Walmart, and I just hot glued it inside the bed of my truck. And then I wanted to create a grapevine wreath to go on the front of the truck, so I'm using 2 strips of these berry garland stems. I formed them into circles, and then I took both of them and then just wrapped them around each other so that they had that grapevine wreath look. I was going to keep the berries on, but then decided I didn't really like the way that they looked, so I just used my scissors to cut the berries off of the stems. Next, I'm using a small strip of this white yarn from Dollar Tree. I made a really simple bow, cut that down a little bit, and then I just hot glued it to the very top of my grapevine wreath that I just created. And once I had my wreath all done, I hot glued it to the very front end of my truck. Here is my Merry Christmas farm truck all finished. I love the rustic look of this one. I know that you can get these in so many different stores right now, but I love that I was able to really customize my own truck. Now moving right along into DIY number 5. For this one, I'm using 2 different size grapevine wreaths. I'm using a 6-inch and an 8-inch. The 8-inch one I believe is from Dollar Tree, and the 6-inch one is from Michael's. I'm also using this little snowman hat ornament from Hobby Lobby. It is unfinished. First thing I did was just cut off the tag from my hat, and then I painted it with my Folk Art chalk paint in the color Rich Black. I only had to do 1 coat of this paint. Then I needed to attach my two wreaths together, so I just put the small wreath on top of the larger wreath, and then I used a piece of jute to tie the two together. And then to make sure that it was super secure, I did a second piece of jute on the other side to tie them together. And then of course I wanted to really make sure that they were not going to move around, so I just added some hot glue in between both of the wreaths to just make sure that they are going to be nice and secure, and then you won't see that hot glue when I add some stuff later on, like this piece of fabric. This is from Hobby Lobby. I love this fabric so much, and all of the ends of the fabric from where I've cut it in the past are really frayed looking, and I thought it would be perfect for this nice little rustic snowman. As you can see here, I just worked with the fabric, tying it around the two wreaths and then using some hot glue to keep that fabric in place. Next, I'm adding some greenery around the scarf of my snowman. These I believe are from Hobby Lobby, and I just cut them down and then placing them all around my scarf and attaching them with some hot glue. As you have probably noticed, I like cutting my greenery pieces down before attaching them. I always like adding a little bit at a time so that it doesn't look too bulky. I'm also using some of these berry stems from Hobby Lobby, and I added those around with the greenery around the scarf. Then I added some more greenery pieces. These ones have little white tips on them, and I thought that that would add a little bit of dimension, so I just added those using some hot glue. And then also this large button, I just used hot glue and attached it to the very front of my scarf. And then back to my little top hat here, I wanted to add some jute to the top of it, so I used some hot glue to hold the jute in place, and then I wrapped the jute several times around the base of the hat, and then I just cut that off and hot glued the end of it down. And then to add some detail to my hat, of course, I added some greenery using some hot glue. I just cut down several pieces of greenery and hot glued them going in both directions, and then I also added a little piece of that berry stem to add more detail. I also added some greenery that has some fake snow on it. I wanted to add just a little bit of this white color, and I hot glued those right behind the greenery that I had already added. And then the last step is just me hot gluing the hat on the very top wreath. And here is my snowman wreath all finished. This one, again, such an easy project. I've seen so many different styles of these snowman wreaths online, but I really love the rustic look of this one. And now for the sixth DIY today, I'm going to be making a poinsettia wreath. And for this one, I'm using this 6-inch wreath ring from Hobby Lobby. And then I'm also using 3 packs of these poinsettia flowers in the Christmas section from Hobby Lobby. And what I'm first doing is taking my flowers, and I'm going to be removing all of the little stickers that are on the back of the flowers. You could use the stickers if you want, but I'm going to be gluing mine on. So I just continued to take the stickers off of 11 of the little flowers, and then I'm just setting them on my wreath ring to see how many I need. And like I said, I ended up using 11 of them, and I just wanted to have them all spaced out before I actually started gluing them down. So once I had them all set, then I just started hot gluing each flower down onto the wreath ring. I continued this step until all of the flowers were glued down, and that was it for this project. Could not have been easier, and I think this wreath turned out really cute and it looks so high-end. Moving into DIY number 7, for this project I'm using an entire pack of wood shims from Lowe's. There are 12 different shims in a pack. And then I am taking each shim and painting them with my Waverly chalk paint in the color Plaster. I only did 1 coat of paint on each shim. And then to make them look a little bit more rustic and distressed, I used my Java colored paint with a Dollar Tree stencil brush, and I just dry brush this color on each one of my shims. I'm also going to be using one of these wooden mini candlesticks from Hobby Lobby. They do come in a pack, and I believe there's 4 in each pack. And I'm going to be painting that with my Java colored chalk paint, just 1 quick coat of that, and then once that's all painted and dry, I'm then going to be taking some sandpaper and sanding over that to give it a nice distressed look. Next, it's time to start assembling everything. I'm taking my wood shims and I'm hot gluing them together. I'm just placing the hot glue right on the shim and then placing another shim on top of that. But I did make sure that they were even on the bottom so that I don't have a crooked tree. And I just continued hot gluing each one of my shims together until I had all 12 glued. And then I used some hot glue on the bottom in the center of my wood shims, and then I'm attaching that to the very top of my wood candlestick. Next, I'm adding some of this white cotton cord around the very bottom of my tree at the top of the candlestick. I measured it to go around, and then I just hot glued each end of the cotton cord around the candlestick. Of course, I'm going to be adding some greenery to this project, so I'm using some of this here that I had in my stash, and I love how this one has the white tips. So I just cut those down really small, and then I hot glued those on the front of my tree right on that cotton cord that I just added. And then I also wanted to add a very small jute bow, so I just took a piece of jute, made a really simple bow, and then I hot glued that right over top of my greenery. And this is the wood shim tree all finished. This one, again, was super easy and inexpensive, and this one would be perfect to leave out after Christmas with your winter decor. Moving right along into DIY number 8. For this project, I'm going to be using this wood framed piece from the Target dollar spot. I picked it up this last fall. It had a bunch of fall items on the inside that you could DIY, but I'm just using the frame for this project today. The inside I'm painting with my Waverly chalk paint in the color Plaster. Then for the outside frame part, I'm painting that with my Java color chalk paint from Folk Art. Then once this paint was all dry, I took some sandpaper and sanded around all of the areas that were painted with the Java color to give the frame a distressed rustic look. I'm using these 1 through 24 countdown to Christmas numbers that I got from Hobby Lobby, and I created this Christmas countdown image in Design Space and just cut that out on my Cricut. I'm just getting that all transferred onto the very top of my frame, and then I'm adding all of my letters, or my numbers, 1 through 24. I'm just placing them where I think I'm going to want them to be before I start gluing them down. There's nothing worse than gluing something and then realizing that you have glued it in the wrong spot. So I'm just doing that before I start gluing them down, like I said. And I will mention that I didn't notice this when I bought these, but a lot of the numbers are crooked on the stars and trees. So just keep that in mind if you are going to be getting these from Hobby Lobby. So now that I have everything placed where I want them to be, I just go through each one and hot glue it down onto the surface of my frame. Next, I'm using one of these little greenery ties from Dollar Tree, and I did cut it down to the size that I want my wreath to be, and then just formed it into a circle. I did need to cut down the green long pieces so that it would look more like a natural pine wreath. So here I'm just using my scissors to do that. And then I did want to add a bow at the very top of my wreath. So I just used a small piece of jute to create a really simple bow. And then I hot glued that bow at the very top of my wreath. And then I can use my wreath to change the days until Christmas. And I just think this was a super simple and easy project. And even though the numbers are a little bit crooked on some of the stars and trees, I still think it turned out really cute. Next is a DIY number 9, and for this one I'm using this standing triangle from Dollar Tree, and I'm also using 10 wood shims from Lowe's. And the first thing I needed to do was measure all of my wood shims so that I could get them cut down. I am going to be overlapping them going all the way up the sides of the triangle. So once I have them all set where I think I'm going to want them to be, I then just used a pen to mark off where I needed to cut all of my wood shims. Because the wood shims are really thin, I was able to just score them with my utility knife and then snap them off instead of using a saw. And then the ends of the shims that were a little rough, after I cut them off, I just used a little piece of sandpaper to sand them down smooth. I then continued to cut the rest of the shims down until I had all 10 of them cut. And once they were cut, they were time to paint, and I painted all 10 of them with my Waverly chalk paint in the color Plaster. I then painted the entire inside of the triangle with my folk art chalk paint in the color Antique Green. I did have to do 3 different coats of this paint to get it covered up nicely, and then for the outside of the triangle I used that same Waverly paint in Plaster. The words that I'm going to be placing on the inside of my triangle are "Oh Christmas Tree." The letters that spell out O and tree are all from Hobby Lobby, and then the word Christmas is from the Target dollar spot a couple years ago, and I just still had it left over. So for the words to spell out O and tree, I am painting all of those with the Waverly paint in Plaster. And then the word Christmas, I originally had painted it in Plaster and then didn't like it, so I went back and painted it with the Tuscan red color from Folk Art. Then it was time to start assembling everything, so I'm taking my wood shims and I am hot gluing them on each side of my triangle, just going from the largest to smallest all the way up the side of my triangle. And like I said, I did the same thing on both sides. After all of my shims are glued on, I then wanted to give this a piece a distressed look, so I used some of that Java colored chalk paint on a Dollar Tree stencil brush, and I dry brushed it on top of all of the plastered colored paint. And I did have some pieces that were not painted that I did end up going back and touching those up with the plastered colored paint. Next, I'm placing all of my wood letters and words in the center of my triangle, just getting those exactly placed where I want them to be before I start using hot glue on the back side to glue all of them down. I then decided to use one of these wood stars from Dollar Tree. I'm painting it with a Tuscan red color from Folk Art, and then I'm just hot gluing it on the very top of my triangle. For the last step in this project, I'm using some of this really cute beaded garland that I picked up from Walmart. I wanted to have it draped around the very front of my triangle, so I just cut that down to size, and then I did have to remove a few of the beads so that I could have some of that jute exposed so that I could glue it down along the back side of my triangle. And here is my Oh Christmas Tree tabletop sign all finished. I think this one is so different from a lot of things that I've seen out right now, and you can definitely customize this to fit with your own decor. And now for the 10th and final DIY for today. I'm using 5 of these wood sticks that came from Hobby Lobby. They come in a giant pack, and I'm just using 5 of them here today. I'm then painting all 5 of them with the Waverly paint in Plaster. After my paint is all dry, I'm then placing the sticks into a star shape before I start attaching all of the sticks together. And to attach them, I'm just using some good old hot glue. I'm just moving the sticks over a little bit, putting the hot glue on one stick and then placing the other one on top of it to attach it. And I did this in all of the places that the sticks touch each other when forming my star. I'm adding some jute around all of the ends of my stars to add some really cute detail. So to do that, I just tied the jute around one of the ends, and then I wrapped the jute around the end of the pieces of wood on my star several times, and then just cut the end of that off and hot glued it down. And then I continued that for the other 4 ends of my star. Now that I have all of my jute added, I did want to go back and cut down the top wood piece of my star. They were a little bit long on the ends, and I was able to just use my utility knife to score the pieces of wood a little bit and then cut those down just because those were a little bit too long for my liking. Next, I'm using some of this berry garland from Dollar Tree. I wrapped it into a circle twice to form a wreath. Next, I'm using some of this fabric and I'm creating a bow. I thought this was a really rustic and cute and would go perfect on this piece. So I just made a really simple bow, and I left the ends of this fabric looking really frayed. And then after I had my bow, I then attached the wreath to the center of my star. And then before I added my bow to the very top of it, I did add a few of these little greenery pieces using some hot glue. And then once those were down, I then attached my bow that I just created. And then, because you guys know I love adding so much detail, after I attached this checked bow, I did go through and make a really tiny jute bow, and I added that on top of my checked bow. For the very last step in this project, I used a piece of jute to create a hanger, and then I hot glued that along the back side of my star at the very top. And here is my rustic star all finished. You could use this one as a wreath or as an ornament. I just really think it was a simple and affordable project. For the first project today, I'm going to be starting with one of these smaller unfinished wood framed pieces from Hobby Lobby. And the first thing I'm going to do is paint the inside of this piece with my Waverly chalk paint in the color Ivory. Then for the outside framed portion, I'm going to be painting that with my folk art paint in the color Engine Red. Next, I'm going to be using some of these mini gingerbread men. These ones are from Hobby Lobby and they do come on a stick. I am going to be removing all of the sticks from the bottom, and to do that, I'm just using some pliers to pull them out. I am going to be using 12 of the gingerbread men for this particular project. So once I have all of the sticks out of all of my men, then I'm just going to be placing them down on my frame just to kind of see exactly how far I want them spaced out before I start hot gluing each one of them back down. Then I wanted to add a little bit of detail, so here I'm just using some of this red and white striped string, and I'm just placing it around the bottom of the frame and then hot gluing the ends of that string along the back side of the frame. I then did another piece of the string doing the exact same thing to the top of the frame, and then I thought it would be really cute to add 2 more on each side of the frame, but in all 4 corners I'm going to be overlapping that string. And this is what the piece looks like all finished. I think it is super cute. It was really easy to do, and this would be perfect to add to a shelf or a tiered tray this Christmas. Next up is a DIY number 2. For this one, I'm going to be using 2 of these mini unfinished rolling pins, and these ones I did pick up from Hobby Lobby, and they normally come in a pack of 3. So I'm just going to be painting both of the rolling pins with my folk art paint in the color Engine Red, and I'm just going to be painting like the middle of the rolling pin that color. Then for the handles of my rolling pins, I'm painting them all with my Waverly paint in the color Ivory. I did create and cut this gingerbread word out on my Cricut, and I will have a link down to it in my description box if you are interested in cutting it out as well. So here I'm just getting it centered on one of my rolling pins and getting it all transferred. I'm then going to be adding one of these little mini gingerbread men like cookie cutter, and this is also from Hobby Lobby. And I'm just going to be using some of my red and white striped string, wrapping it around the little cookie cutter and just tying it off to make sure that it stays in place. I'm then going to be taking that string and tying it around the handle of my rolling pin. I did the second rolling pin the exact same way, only I cut out these 3 gingerbread men on my Cricut instead of the words. This is what the rolling pins look like all finished. They were, again, really easy to do, super cute, and they would look perfect on a tiered tray. Moving right along into DIY number 3, for this one, I'm using one of these unfinished wood frames. This one is from Michaels from the Make Market brand. I just removed the tags that were on the piece, and then I started staining the outside of the frame with my folk art wood tint in the color Walnut. Then for the inside of this piece, I painted it with the folk art paint in the color Engine Red. I'm going to be using this North Pole Cookie Company stencil, and the edges were a little bit too large for me to place inside of my frame, so here I'm just cutting all 4 sides off. I believe the stencil is from Amazon, but I can't exactly remember. I'll try to have it linked down in my description box if I can find it. So for all of the lettering that I'm going to be stenciling on, I am going to be using my Waverly chalk paint in the color Ivory, and I did use painter's tape to hold down the stencil in place so that it didn't move around while I was painting. Once the paint dried, I then removed the tape and my stencil. I did want to add some detail pieces to my sign, so I'm going to be using 4 of these mini candy cane ornaments. These ones are from Walmart, and to get the little hangers off of the top, I just used my pliers and kind of wiggled it back and forth, and they just popped right off. I then hot glued 2 of the candy canes together, kind of crisscrossing each other at the top, and then I did the 2 other ones the same way. Once I had them all glued together, I'm then going to be gluing each set of candy canes at the top of my sign on the left and the right. And here's the sign all finished. It only took a few really simple steps to make this beautiful sign, and I think it looks really high-end. Next up is DIY number 4. For this one, I'm going to be using one of these mini cutting boards, and this one is from Hobby Lobby. I'm painting the entire piece with my Waverly paint and Ivory, and then I'm going to be using 5 of these little mini gingerbread men on sticks. These ones are from Hobby Lobby as well, and I'm removing the sticks from the bottom of the gingerbread men with some pliers. I'm then going to be attaching all 5 of the gingerbread men using some hot glue right on the front side of my cutting board. I thought the cutting board looked a little bit plain, so I wanted to add a little bit of color to it. I'm using one of my red paint markers, and I'm just going around all of the edges of the cutting board just to add a little bit of detail. For another little detail piece, I'm using some of this red ribbon, and I believe this one is from Joann Fabrics. I'm just creating a really simple bow, and then I'm going to be attaching it at the very top of the cutting board. And then for the very last step, I'm just going to be placing a piece of jute around the hole at the top of the cutting board and tying off a knot. This is the mini cutting board complete, and I think it is so cute, and again, another piece that's perfect for a tiered tray. Next is a DIY number 5. For this one, I'm going to be using this sign that I got from Dollar General a really long time ago, but it's just been sitting in my craft stash, and I wanted to make it over today. So the first thing I'm going to be doing is painting over all of the writing that's on the sign with my Waverly paint and Ivory. Then I'm going to be using one of these stencils that I already used on another sign in the video, but I'm going to be using it a little bit different for this one. So I'm just getting it placed at the top portion of my sign, and then I'm going to be using some painter's tape to hold it into place. I'm only going to be using the words that say North Pole Cookie Company, and I'm going to be taping over the little gingerbread man as well. Then for the paint color, I'm going to be using to stencil on. It is from Faux in the color Engine Red. I'm then going to be moving my stencil down a little bit underneath the rolling pin that's on my sign, and I'm going to be using the part of the stencil that says Baked Fresh Daily, and I'm not going to be using anything else that's on the stencil. And I'm going to be using that same engine red color for all of my words. Then once the paint is dry, I'm then removing my stencil. I am going to be using some more of these mini gingerbread men, and again, just removing them from their sticks. I am using 7 of them on this sign. I'm hot gluing one of them right in the center of the top, right above the words Cookie Company, and then the 6 remaining ones, as you can see, I'm hot gluing at the very bottom of the sign. I could have left the sign as is, but I did want to add a little bit of detail to the very top. So I'm using some of this red ribbon from Joann Fabrics, and I'm doing it kind of like a diagonal around the corner of the top of the sign, and I just wrapped those ends of the ribbon around the back side and secured them with hot glue, and I did the same thing to the other side as well, so both sides look the same. This is the sign all complete. I love how this one turned out. Those little gingerbread men are adorable and perfect for this sign. Moving right into DIY number 6. For this one, I had this beaded garland piece that I got on clearance from Hobby Lobby. I've had it for a while, and today I'm finally going to be making it over. So the first thing I did was cut off the bottom circle piece because I'm not going to be using it. And then I did want to paint some of the beads that were on the garland. So I took the beads off of the strand of jute, and then the ones that were painted white I left, and then some of the ones that were that stained color I left as well. But I'm going to be painting some of them this red color, and this is from Faux in the color Engine Red. I ended up painting 7 of the beads with this red color, and then I'm going to be using this wooden gingerbread man wood cutout. This is an ornament that I got from Walmart this year, and he was only 98 cents. So I'm just going to be taking the jute hanger off of him, and then I'm going to be stringing on all of my beads onto the jute strand that's attached to the tassel. So I did red first, then the stained color, then the white bead, and I just continued with that pattern until I had all of my beads on my jute. Then you probably guessed it, I'm going to be attaching my gingerbread man ornament to the very bottom of that jute. Here's the piece all finished. I think if you're doing a gingerbread theme in your kitchen, this is the perfect accent piece. Next up is a DIY number 7. For this one, I'm using another one of these unfinished wood frames from Hobby Lobby. This is the medium size, and I'm just going to be taking my folk art wood tint in walnut once again and staining the entire outside of the frame. Then once that's stained, I'm going to be painting the inside of my frame with that Waverly paint in ivory. I'm going to be using this North Pole bakery cutout that I did on my Cricut. This is in Cricut Design space already. I did not create this one, but I thought it was really cute. So here I'm just getting it centered in the middle of my sign and then getting it all transferred. I wanted to add a detail to this sign like I did on one of the other signs with this red and white striped string. So here I'm just hot gluing the ends of the string along the back side and having the string go along the front of the frame. I did the same thing for the top of the frame and then the same thing for both sides. And I had the string overlapping on all 4 corners. I just really think that this is a cute way to add detail to the sign, and it adds so much than just leaving it blank. I had 4 of these mini gingerbread men buttons, and these ones are from Hobby Lobby. I thought that they would be perfect for this piece. So here I'm just going to be using some hot glue to attach the men in all 4 corners of my sign. Here's the sign all finished. I think this one looks really high end, and this might be my favorite from today's video so far. Next up is a DIY number 8. For this one, I'm going to be using this tree that I've already done, but then I didn't like it anymore, so I ripped the stuff off that was on it, and I'm just going to be redoing it. So here I'm just painting the entire tree with the Waverly paint in the color ivory, and then once that paint was dry, I started gluing some of this red ribbon along the bottom edge, and then I just hot glued the edges of those ribbon along the back side of the tree. I then used another piece of the red ribbon on the top of the bottom slat and did the same thing, just hot glued it and then wrapped the edges around to the back of the tree. For that bottom piece in between all of the ribbon, I'm going to be using 3 of these gingerbread men stickers, and these ones are from Hobby Lobby. I'm hot gluing them spaced out a little bit because I'm going to be putting some snowflakes in between. So the snowflakes that I'm going to be using are these unfinished wood ones from Dollar Tree, and I'm going to be painting them with my raw sienna color from Faux. I did 2 of them this color, and then once the paint was all dry, I then took my white paint marker and then just painted the front of it like a gingerbread cookie. I then hot glued 2 of those snowflakes turned into gingerbread cookies in between my 3 gingerbread men. Next, I'm going to be using some of these wooden star buttons. I'm going to be using 10 of them total, but I'm going to be stringing 5 of them each on this wired piece. I'm not even sure what this is called, but it's just kind of like a brown wire. I got this from Hobby Lobby, and like I said, I'm just stringing 5 of these star buttons onto 2 different strands. So I'm going to have 2 sets of 5. I'm then going to take my first set of 5 and I'm placing it around the slat that you can see here, and then I just hot glued the wires of that piece along the back side of my tree. I'm then taking the second strand of 5 stars and then wrapping it around the bottom portion of that slat, and again just hot gluing those wire ends to the back side of my tree. I'm then adding another piece of this red ribbon right in between the 2 star strands and securing that along the back side. I started placing some of these unfinished wood buttons on top of that red piece of ribbon, and I really was liking the way that it looked, so I ended up hot gluing 5 of them right along that red ribbon. And then I added even more red ribbon pretty much on each slat at the top and bottom. I added red ribbon except for the very top slat. I'm then going to be adding 2 more of these gingerbread men from Hobby Lobby in between the 2 red ribbons that I just attached. And then for the very top of the tree, I ended up placing this piece of red ribbon a little bit farther down from the top of the tree. And then in between that, I did another one of these snowflakes that looks like a gingerbread cookie. Then for the top of my tree, I'm using one of these larger unfinished wood buttons, and then I'm attaching one of the star buttons in the center of that and then hot gluing those at the very top of my tree. Here's my tree all finished. I love the look of this tree, and I think I forgot to mention the wood tree is from Hobby Lobby and they have them during the Christmas season. Now for DIY number 9. For this one, I'm going to be using another one of these wooden framed pieces from Hobby Lobby. This is one of the larger ones, and I'm using that same folk art wood tint in the color walnut to stain the frame. I just love the look of this. And then for the inside of my piece, I'm going to be painting that with the Waverly Paint in Ivory once again. For the words that I'm going to be using, I'm using these unfinished wood letters. These ones are from Hobby Lobby, and I'm spelling out the words gingerbread and bakery, and I'm painting all of the letters with the folk art paint in the color engine red. I'm then getting all of my letters to spell out the word gingerbread placed how I want them to be. I am going to be doing them kind of on like an arch at the very top, and then I'm hot gluing each one of the letters down. I'm also going to be using this unfinished wood gingerbread man. This one is, I believe, from a craft set that came from the Target Dollar Spot last year, but I'm not exactly sure. Anyway, I wanted him to be the same color as these other 2 gingerbread men that I'm going to be using on my sign, and those ones are from Hobby Lobby. I was trying to mix a few paint colors together to get the same color as the other 2, but I was not successful, so I just ended up painting him and leaving him this brown color. And I hot glued him right in the center of my sign, and then I had already placed the bakery letters underneath, so I knew exactly where to put my gingerbread man. But now I'm just going to be using some hot glue to attach all of those letters down as well, and then attaching the other 2 smaller gingerbread men right on each side of the larger one in the middle. I then took my white paint marker and went over all of the little opening spots on my gingerbread man just to add some extra detail. For the last step, I ended up adding some of this red, green, and white. This is kind of like a yarn. This is from Hobby Lobby, and I hot glued a strand of it at the very bottom of my sign and then another piece of it at the very top of my sign. This is the sign all finished, a really easy and inexpensive piece that you can add to your gingerbread kitchen decor this year. Next is the 10th and final DIY for today. I'm going to be taking one of these metal gingerbread cookie cutters. You can get these pretty much anywhere around Christmas time. And I'm just going to be using one of my Cricut tools to poke a hole in the very top of my cookie cutter. You do want to be careful when doing this. And then once I had my hole made, I just used some tweezers to pull some of this red and white string through the hole that I made, and then I'm just going to be tying a knot at the very top to make sure that the string is nice and secure. I'm then going to be using some of this beaded garland from Hobby Lobby. Originally, I was going to cut some of the red, these are like pom-pom beads, it's kind of the only way I can describe them, and then white beads. Well, I had a hard time trying to get the red like cotton beads on the string, so I ended up just going with 3 of the white beads, and then I just tied a little hanger at the very top, and that was it for this project. Super easy gingerbread man ornament. And this is what the ornament looks like on my Christmas tree. It is so cute, and it was super easy and inexpensive to do, and you can do it with any type of cookie cutter. For the first DIY today, I'm going to be using one of these unfinished wood frames, and this is from Hobby Lobby from the Woodpile brand. The first thing I'm doing is taking my folk art wood tint in the color walnut, and I'm just staining the outside of the frame and then also the back side of this piece as well so that it looks nice and finished. Then for the inside, I'm painting that with my Waverly paint in the color ivory. Then after that paint is dry, I'm using my espresso colored chalk paint on a chip brush and just very lightly dry brushing this color on top of the ivory to give it more of a distressed look. I'm also going to be using 9 of these little reindeer heads that I picked up from Hobby Lobby this year, but I did want to remove all of the little red pom-poms that they had for their noses, so I just scraped them off. They were really easy to remove. I did that on all 9 of them. Instead of those pom-poms, I'm going to be using 9 of these little wooden caps that I also picked up from Hobby Lobby, and I'm just going to be hot gluing those right on the reindeer's nose where the pom-poms originally were. Then I'm going to be painting the wooden caps. On 8 of them, I'm going to be painting them with my rich black chalk paint from Folk Art. And then on the 9th cap, on the last reindeer, I'm going to be painting that with my Imperial color chalk paint from Folk Art. Next, I'm placing the reindeer heads on the frame, just getting them spaced exactly where I want them to be. I am spacing them to where I can have writing underneath each one of the heads, and I am putting the one with the red nose in the center of the frame. Once I have them all spaced out, I am using some hot glue on the back side of each head to get them attached. For underneath all of the reindeer heads, I am doing all 9 of Santa's reindeer's names, and I did cut them out on my Cricut. I will have a link to them if you guys are interested in the cut files. If you don't have a Cricut, you can always use stickers or just hand write them. Here I'm just getting each one centered and transferred right underneath each head. And that was it for this project. This is what it looks like all finished. I think it turned out so cute, and it was so easy to do. And like I said, if you don't have a Cricut, you can always just handwrite these or use stickers to create the same look. Now for DIY number 2. For this one, I'm going to be using this sign that I got on clearance at Hobby Lobby. And then I first started by painting the back of it with a red color, and then it just was not turning out, and I made a mess of it, as you can see here. So what I did is just remove the back side of the sign, and I flipped it over so that I could still use the frame of the sign and not have it like completely ruined. So here I'm just painting the other side of the sign with my Waverly chalk paint in the color ivory. Then for the frame, I'm painting that with my Folk Art paint in the color Imperial. And what was great about having the frame actually removed is it was way easier to paint. And then once the paint was all dry, I then used some hot glue around the inside edges to attach the backing back around the frame. I'm then using these unfinished wood letters from Hobby Lobby to spell out the words gingerbread and cafe. And instead of having to paint all of the letters with black paint, I thought it would be way easier to use a black marker. So here I'm just using my black Sharpie to color in all of the fronts of the letters. So if you have a black paint pen or a Sharpie, this is way easier than painting each letter. Another piece I'm going to be using in this project is this mini unfinished wood cutting board, and this came from a Christmas craft kit from the Target dollar spot that I picked up this year. I first painted it with an ivory colored paint and then decided to change it. So here I'm just painting over that ivory color with an olive green colored paint, and then once that paint was dry, I wanted to make the edges pop a little bit, so I use the ivory colored paint to just go around all of the edges and give it a little bit of distressing. Now that I have everything all painted, I'm just placing all of my letters exactly where I want them to be before I start attaching them. To attach them, I'm just using a little bit of hot glue on the back side of each letter. I then did the same thing with the cutting board and the word cafe. I did the cutting board right in the center of the sign and then the words cafe right underneath the cutting board. I'm also going to be using 5 of these little wooden gingerbread men that I picked up from Hobby Lobby. I just thought they were so cute, and I'm using 3 of them with a green bow tie and then 2 with a red bow tie. The one with the green bow tie I'm placing in the center of my cutting board, and then I'm doing the ones with the red bow tie on each side of the one in the center, and then the 2 last green bow ties I'm doing on the outside, like you can see me placing them here. Then to add just a little bit of detail, I'm using some of this pine greenery. I'm cutting 2 really small pieces off of these stems, and then I'm just going to be hot gluing them at the very top of the cutting board right above the gingerbread man. And then I'm doing a really simple bow with a piece of jute, and then I'm going to be hot gluing that right in the center of those 2 greenery pieces that I've added. Here is the sign all finished. I'm so in love with how this one turned out. Again, another really easy project, and I'm so excited to display it in my kitchen this Christmas season. Next is DIY number 3. For this one, I'm using one of these unfinished wood palette signs from Michaels. And the first thing I'm doing is staining the entire piece with my folk art wood tint in the color walnut. I just painted on the stain to really get in the grooves of the wood, and then once I had a good amount on, then I would just wipe away the excess with an old rag. Another piece I'll be using for this project is this unfinished wood deer head that I picked up from Hobby Lobby, and I'm painting the entire head with my Waverly paint in the color ivory. Then once the ivory color was all dry, I wanted to add a little bit of distressing, and I used my espresso colored chalk paint, and I took a small brush and went around all of the edges of the deer first, and then I used that same espresso color on a larger chip brush to go over the front of the deer, and I did it in vertical motions to keep all of my brush strokes going the same direction, and I just really like the look of the distressing on the deer head. I'll be using some of these pine greenery pieces that came off of a Christmas stem from Hobby Lobby, and I'm using some hot glue to attach them around the deer's neck to kind of resemble what would look like a wreath around the deer's neck. When attaching these pieces, I did overlap them underneath a little bit so that it was seamless and you couldn't see any gaps in between the greenery. And once I had this first layer on, I wanted to add a second layer of different colored greenery to kind of just make it pop a little bit more. So I'm using some of these that I had in my craft stash that look like they have a little bit of snow on the tips of them. And then I just added those with the same hot glue right over top of the other greenery that I've already added. Next, I'm using this red ribbon to create a bow. I wrapped it around my 3 fingers twice, and then I'm taking the end and pushing it through the bottom fingers and then pulling that end piece up and over my fingers, and then there's a little loop at the bottom. I'm just taking that top piece and putting it through the bottom loop and then back up again and pulling it tight to create my bow. I hope that makes sense. It is really hard to explain how to make a bow, and please don't mind all of the paint on my fingers. So once I have my bow created, I'm then just gonna be using my scissors to cut the ends of the bow in a diagonal. Next, I'm using some hot glue to attach the bow right in the center of the greenery on the neck, and then I'm using this little unfinished wood button, and I'm attaching that right in the center of my bow. Next, I'm attaching the deer head to the center of the wood piece that I stained earlier, just using some hot glue on the back side of the deer head and then pressing it down. This is what it looks like all finished. This one, again, another really easy project, and it looks so rustic. It goes perfect with my rustic Christmas decor that I'm using this year. Now for the fourth and final DIY today, I'm going to be using this sign that I picked up from Hobby Lobby when it was on clearance for $2.49. I'm first going to start by painting the inside of the sign with my Waverly chalk paint in the color Ivory. Then I'm painting the entire outside frame portion of this sign with my Imperial color chalk paint. I'm using this unfinished wood mug that came from a Christmas craft pack this year from the Target dollar spot, and I'm painting this with that same Imperial color chalk paint. And then I'm also going to be using this unfinished wood candy cane. This came from that same craft kit, and I'm just going to be painting it like a candy cane. I did the ivory color and then the Imperial to paint the candy cane. And then another little piece that I'm going to be using is one of these unfinished wooden snowflakes from Dollar Tree, and I'm painting this with the ivory colored paint. I did create this old-fashioned hot cocoa decal on my Cricut, and I will have a link to it if you guys are interested in the cut file. If you don't have a Cricut, again, you can either handwrite this or you can use stickers to create a same look. I'm just getting it all centered and transferred at the very top of my sign. And once I have this piece on, I'm then going to be hot gluing the candy cane on the very back of the mug, like you can see me doing here. And then I'm going to be hot gluing the mug underneath the hot cocoa words right in the center of the sign. I'm also going to be using this Have a Cup of Cheer decal that I also created on my Cricut, and we'll have a link to this one in my description box as well. And for this one, I'm just getting it centered and transferred right underneath the mug. And then the very last step, I'm just going to be using some hot glue to attach my snowflake right in the center of my mug. Here is the sign all finished, another really easy and simple project. For the first DIY today, I'm going to be creating a standing wreath using this metal circular piece that I just recently picked up from Dollar Tree. The first thing I'm going to be doing is staining the very bottom wood piece on this, and I'm using my folk art wood tint in the color Walnut. Once I have that all stained, then I'm going to be moving on to the wreath portion, and I'm using these really pretty greenery stems from Hobby Lobby. These ones look very realistic to me, and I always pick them up every year. And I'm just starting off by hot gluing each one of the greenery pieces right onto the metal. And I did already cut the greenery pieces down a little bit so that they were shorter and easier to work with. And then in between each greenery piece, I did lift it up a little bit and then put each piece underneath each other, if that makes sense, so that there was no gaps in between the greenery. I'm also using these wood letter beads to spell out the word Noel, and I'm just stringing them onto a piece of jute. And I did get these from either Hobby Lobby or Amazon. Once I have them all strung on the jute, I did make a knot right next to the letter L and then right next to the letter N so that the word stays in place and it doesn't move around on the piece of jute. Next, I'm creating my bow to go on my wreath. I'm using this burlap ribbon with this black trim that I got from Walmart a few years ago, but you can get ribbon like this at pretty much any craft store. I first started by cutting a piece that was about 5 inches long, and then I cut a second piece that was a few inches longer than the first piece. I'm then going to be hot gluing the ends of the ribbon together to form a circle like you can see me doing here. And again, I did that for both pieces of my ribbon. And then once I have them all hot glued together, I'm then going to be placing the smaller piece on top of the larger piece and then just gathering them together in the center. I'm then wrapping a piece of jute around both pieces and then just tying that off on the back side and cutting off the extra long jute ends. I'm now taking a third piece of this burlap ribbon and just cutting it at about 8 or 10 inches, and this is going to be the tail end for my bow. I'm then taking that piece and just gathering it right in the center and then using a piece of jute to tie it off. I am leaving the ends of the jute a little bit longer because I'm going to be using those to tie the other part of my bow together. So here I'm just placing what's going to be the tail ends right on the back of the bow and then just tying the jute along the back side to attach the two. I then wanted my bow tail ends to have a V shape, so I'm folding the ribbon in half and then cutting upward to form my V, and I did this to both of the tail ends of my bow. Next, it was time for me to attach my bow to the top of my wreath. I just flipped this piece over, and then since this already had a metal bar that went across the top, I just used that to tie my bow on. And then once I had it all tied on, I just cut away the extra long jute ends. And then it was time for me to add my Noel word. So to do this, I just added some hot glue on each side of the metal circle and then just made sure that the jute was pulled really tight. And then that was it for this project. This is what my standing wreath looks like. I think it turned out super cute. It was really easy to do, and I just love how realistic these greenery pieces are. Now moving right along into DIY number 2. For this one, I'm creating a wooden snowman, and I'm starting with a scrap piece of wood here that's 13.5 by 2.5 inches. And then I'm using my folk art chalk paint in the color Rich Black to paint the very top part of this piece. I'm also going to be using this paint stick that I've cut down, and it is 5.25 by 1 inch. And I'm also painting that with that same Rich Black colored chalk paint. Then to create the base for my snowman, I'm using this piece that is originally from Dollar Tree, and I've already cut it down, and it is 5 inches. And again, using that same Rich Black chalk paint to paint this piece. And I will mention I only had to do 1 coat of paint for all of these pieces. Now that I have all of my pieces painted black that I need painted that color, I'm moving back to the first piece that I painted just the top portion of it black. I'm now painting the bottom portion of that piece of wood with my Waverly chalk paint in the color Plaster. Then for my snowman's eyes, I'm using 2 of these really small wooden cap pieces, and these are from Hobby Lobby, and I'm painting them with my Rich Black colored paint. And then I'm using one of these teardrop shaped wood pieces, and I'm just cutting it into the shape of what looks like a carrot, and this is going to be my snowman's nose. And then painting that piece with my Pueblo colored chalk paint from Folk Art. Next, it's time to start putting my snowman together. So I'm using hot glue on the back side of my paint stick to place it right in between the black and white colors, and I did place it on in a diagonal. To attach the wood caps for my snowman's eyes, I'm using hot glue along the back side and then just placing them down underneath the hat. I'm then attaching the little carrot nose, which I do end up taking off and then having to reattach, which you'll see here in a minute. And then for my snowman's mouth, I'm using some of this jewelry wire, and I wanted him to have kind of like a worried, silly mouth, so I'm just shaping the wire up and down in a squiggly shape and then just cutting it off once I get the length that I want. But before I attach his mouth, I did need to add some eyebrows onto my snowman. So to do this, I'm just using some of that Rich Black chalk paint, and I'm just freehand painting those on above those wood caps that I added for his eyes. And this is where I took off his nose. I just popped it off, and I wanted to add some rosy cheeks, so I used the Imperial colored chalk paint, and I just very lightly dry brushed little circles on around the cheeks, and then I just added the carrot right back into place where I had it before underneath his eyes. For part of my scarf on my snowman, I'm going to be using this cream and burgundy colored fabric from Hobby Lobby, and I just cut a strip of it a few inches thick. And then here is where you're going to see some changes. I added this scarf around my snowman, and I hated the way it looked, so here I'm ripping it off and I'm switching it up. And then I had also added a jute smile, which I'm taking that off too because I didn't like how that looked. And because I wanted the snowman to look more rustic, I decided to dry brush some of my espresso colored chalk paint over top of him just to give him that more like worn or rustic wood look. So that is what I'm doing here, as I'm peeling off a lot of the things that I did not like. Have you ever done a project and you are just not liking the way that it's turning out and you have to like completely redo it? Let me know in the comments down below. Am I the only one who does this? Now back to the original plan of him having this jewelry wire mouth. I'm just using some hot glue to attach it underneath the carrot. And then I wanted to distress his hat as well. So I'm using some of that plaster colored paint that I used for the snowman's body. And I'm just dry brushing that along the entire hat. And then now for the changes I made to a scarf, I did end up using this burlap ribbon that I got from Walmart a few years ago. And I'm just wrapping it around the piece of wood just to see how long I want the scarf to be, and then cutting that down to size. And then I wanted it to look more scarf-like, so I just kind of folded it over where I thought it would look like if you had a scarf around your neck, and then I hot glued it down into place. Next, I'm adding my burgundy and cream color fabric that I had cut around the burlap ribbon, and I just tied it along the front, and then to make sure that it stays into place, I added a little bit of hot glue. And then I did want to have the tail ends of my scarf to have a V shape. So here I'm just cutting a V on both the ribbon and then also the fabric. I'm also going to be using these two buttons on my snowman. These are wood ones that I had in my collection, and I wanted them to be black, so I'm just painting them with that rich black colored chalk paint. I could not find my black buttons anywhere, so I'm just painting these ones instead. And then once I have those painted, I also wanted to distress the base of my snowman. So I'm going in with that plaster colored paint once again and just distressing this piece just like I did the snowman's hat. I'm now attaching both of the buttons underneath the scarf using some hot glue, and then I'm also going to be using some hot glue to attach my snowman to the base. I did want to add a few extra little details, so I ended up cutting a second piece of this burgundy and cream colored fabric, and I'm just wrapping it around the top of my snowman's hat and then using some hot glue to secure it along the back side. And then I'm also using some of these greenery stems from Hobby Lobby, and I just cut them down into small pieces and hot glued those right on the right hand side of his hat. I also added a little piece of greenery that has snow on it right in the center of the other two green pieces, and then just cut that down a little bit smaller than what it was. I then wanted to add some of these little burgundy berries. These came from a pick from Hobby Lobby, and I just cut 3 of them off, and then I'm hot gluing all 3 of them around the greenery. And this is what my snowman looks like all finished. He did go through a few changes, but I'm really happy with how he turned out, and I hope that you guys really like him as well. Next, we are moving into DIY number 3, and for this one, I'm using this large paper mache cone, and this is from Hobby Lobby. And the first thing I'm doing to it is just painting the entire piece with my Spanish moss chalk paint from Folk Art. Once the paint has dried, I'm then going to be adding some of these Ryobi wood biscuits, and these ones are number 20. And I did get these from Home Depot, and you can also get them from Lowe's or Amazon. First thing I'm doing is just taking my hot glue, placing it on the back side of one of the wood biscuits, and then placing it on the bottom of my cone. And then here you can see I'm just adding each biscuit next to each other until I have the first layer all the way wrapped around my paper mache cone. Then I'm taking that Spanish moss paint once again and then just painting over top of all of my biscuits. I thought it was a lot easier to paint them while they're on the cone than painting them beforehand and then gluing them on the cone. After the paint has dried, I'm then going to be adding another layer of the wood biscuits above the first row that I just did. I'm doing the same steps. I'm placing the hot glue on the back side of the biscuit, and then only this time I'm placing half of the biscuit on the cone and then half of the biscuit on the bottom biscuit that I attached. And then once that row's all done, I'm using that same Spanish moss color and painting all of the biscuits. And I'm pretty much just continuing those steps until I have my entire cone covered with the wood biscuits. And you may be wondering why I painted the cone the green color, but that's because there might be a few spaces that you can see underneath the biscuits, and I wanted that to be the same color as the tree and not the brown paper mache color. Now that I have all of the biscuits added and everything's painted with that Spanish moss, I did want to add what looks like snow on all of the wood biscuits. So here I'm using my plaster colored chalk paint from Waverly, and I'm mainly focusing this color around all of the bottom edges of the biscuits. But then what is left over on my brush, I just very lightly took that on the top part of the biscuit. Hope that makes sense. So I did that to all of the biscuits on the tree, and then once it's all finished, I wanted to add some of these wood beads, and these are from Hobby Lobby. I just hot glued them along the back side of the tree, and then I just wrapped the beads around until I had them spaced out the way I wanted them to be. I then just cut them to the length that I needed, and then I used hot glue to attach the beads to the very top of the tree so that they stay in place and don't move around. I also wanted to add one of these stars. This came from Hobby Lobby in a pack of stars, and I just thought it was super rustic and cute. So I took the little hanger that was on the top of it off, just using some pliers, and then I took some of my toasted brown colored chalk paint from Folk Art, and I just very lightly painted that over top of the star, and I still left some of the original brown color that was on the star poking through, so it was kind of two-toned. I'm then using a scrap piece of balsa wood and then just cutting that down so that it's a few inches in length, and then I'm attaching that to the back side of the star using some hot glue. I'm then taking that star and just attaching it to the very top of my tree. And here is my tree all finished. I have seen a few different variations of these wood biscuit trees, and I think they are so cute. I love the texture of the biscuits. I think it just really adds a lot to the tree, and I just really like the rustic feel of this one that I created. Now moving on into DIY number 4. For this one, I'm using this piece from Dollar Tree, but I've already cut it down to the size that I need, which is 12 inches. And then I'm just going to be painting this entire piece with my Waverly chalk paint in the color Plaster. And I did have to do 2 coats to get that wording all covered up that was originally on it. Then once that paint was dry, I wanted to give this a distressed look, so I'm using some of my espresso chalk paint from Folk Art, and I'm just dry brushing it around the entire piece. For this project, I'm using 3 of these styrofoam cones. These ones are about 4 or 5 inches, and I'm also using, for this one, this green yarn from Dollar Tree. I first started by attaching the yarn to the very bottom of the cone using some hot glue. Then once the glue was set, I started just wrapping the yarn around the cone over and over again. Once I had a good amount of the yarn wrapped around, I would just add a little bit more hot glue to keep the yarn in place and so that it won't move around. I kept doing these steps until I had my cone completely wrapped with this green yarn. And as I was wrapping, I didn't stay in any particular order. I just kind of wrapped it however, and it looked a little bit messy, but I really liked the overlapped yarn look once the tree was all finished, like you can see me doing here. Once I got to the end, I just hot glued the end yarn strand on the very bottom of the cone. Next, I'm going to be using 2 of these smaller 2-inch styrofoam cones, and for both of them, I'm going to be doing them in this cream color yarn that I got from Dollar Tree, and I did the same steps as I did with the green ones. I just went ahead and attached the yarn to the cone and wrapped it until it was completely wrapped with the yarn. I also used one of the larger cones to do the third cone with the jute twine, and I did the same steps as I did with the other ones to attach the jute. So I did 2 of the larger cones in green, and then 1 jute one, and then 2 of the smaller cones with the cream color yarn. For the trunks on my trees, I'm using wood dowels that I've already cut down. For the 3 larger trees, I cut the dowels to 2.5 inches, and then for the 2 smaller trees, I cut the dowels to 1.5 inches. And as you can see here, I'm using my folk art wood tint in the color walnut to stain all of the pieces. Next, I'm taking the dowel and placing it in the center bottom of the styrofoam trees. I'm just pushing it up inside, and then I took it back out, placed some hot glue in the hole, and then put the dowel back in. I did make sure that the 3 larger trees had the dowels inside the same length so that they are going to be standing the same height. And then I was going to leave the very bottom of the trees just not covered up, but then realized that you could probably see the bottom of them, so I decided to add yarn to the bottom of all of the trees. So for the green trees, I just wrapped the green yarn around, and then for the jute one, I did the jute, and then for the ones with the cream color, obviously I did the cream color on the bottom of those. So once those were all finished, I then was able to start decorating all of my trees. For the green ones, I'm using these really pretty bronzed beads, and these did come from Dollar Tree, and I just hot glued the star beads on the tree just kind of randomly where I thought that they would look nice. Then I wanted to add what looked like a garland around the tree. So here I'm using this really tiny white rope. This did come from Hobby Lobby, and I just hot glued it around all of the stars on the tree in kind of like a zigzag shape so that it looked like a garland being wrapped around the tree. And again, I did both of the green trees that I did exactly the same with the stars and the garland. Now to add some detail to the jute tree, I'm using some of this berry garland from Dollar Tree, and it has white berries on it. I started at the top of the tree and then just wrapped the garland all the way down, and then once I had enough on there, I just cut the garland off and secured it to the tree. Then for my 2 cream color trees, I'm using these gold berry picks from Hobby Lobby. I cut 2 little pieces off for each of my cream colored trees, and then I just hot glued one of the berries at the top of the tree and one of the berries at the bottom of the tree. Next, I'm using my drill to create 5 holes into my base piece so that I'm able to place the dowels for my trees inside of the holes. And I did use a drill bit that was just a little bit larger than the dowels so that the dowels will fit in the holes nicely. So I did 2 holes on each side, one in the center, and then I was able to center the other 2 that I did in between the end and the one in the middle. I hope that made sense. Sometimes it's hard to explain things. So then once I had all of the holes, I then just placed some hot glue inside the holes and then placed the dowel that's attached to my tree in the hole. And that's gonna make sure that everything stays nice and secure. So I did the 2 green trees on each end, and then I did the jute tree in the middle, and then the smaller cream colored trees in between those. And here are my trees all finished. This was a really easy project, and what I love about this is these colors are very neutral, so you can use this piece with pretty much any kind of Christmas decor. Next, we're moving into DIY number 5. For this one, I'm going to be creating a wood church, and I'm using this pointed wood picket post, and this is from Lowe's, and I've already cut it down to 6.5 inches. And then with those same posts, I cut 2 more of them, only I did them on diagonals instead of having the tops of them pointed. So that you can see here, I'll have a slant for my roof of my church. And then I'm going to be painting all of the pieces with my Waverly chalk paint in the color plaster, and I did do 2 coats of paint for these. For the base piece of this project, I'm going to be using this scrap piece of wood that is 4 3/4 by 2 inches, and I'm using my folk art wood tint in the color walnut to stain this piece. I just painted the stain on and then wiped away the excess with an old rag. I thought it would be a cool idea to add some extra wood pieces for the roof of my church. So I took 4 wood shims and I cut them down to create my roof. As you can see here, these ones are already cut down, but I'll show you how I did that. I just took the wood shims and just placed them on top of the wood pieces I'm using for my church, marked off where they needed to be cut, and then just used a utility knife to cut them down. So I did 2 pieces the size of the pointed roof and then 2 pieces of the size of the slanted roofs. And then I took my folk art wood tint in walnut once again, and I just stained all 4 of those pieces for my roof. Then it was time to start putting everything together. I used hot glue to attach all 3 of the pieces that I'm using for my church. And then I started hot gluing on the wood shims to create my roof. I started with the top pointed roof first, and as you can see, the wood shims I used were a little bit thicker at the bottom than the top. So I used the thicker part of the shim at the bottom part of my roof, and then the thinner part was at the point. And then I just continued to glue these on until I had all 4 of my roof pieces attached. Next, I'm using a few strips of this balsa wood that I got from Hobby Lobby, and I'm going to be creating 2 windows for the front of my church. I'm cutting 6 pieces for each window. 3 of the pieces I've cut down to 1 inch, and then 3 of the pieces I've cut down to a 1/2 inch. So 6 pieces for each window. I'm also going to be using this pointed craft stick for the door of my church, and this is from the Park Lane brand from Joann Fabrics. I just marked off how long I wanted my door to be, and then I used a utility knife to cut the craft stick. Then I wanted all of my windows and my door to have a stained look, so I'm using that walnut colored wood tint to stain all of my window pieces and my door. I used hot glue to attach this wood piece for my door right in the center, and then for the window pieces I did the larger 1-inch pieces going vertically. I just spaced them out first before I actually glued them down, just to make sure I had them where I wanted them to be, and then I glued each one of them down into place. And then on top of all 3 of those vertical wood pieces, I added the 3 1/2-inch pieces over top. I did 1 at the top of the window, 1 at the bottom of the window, and then 1 going right across the center. And again, I did this for both of my windows. I then thought I wanted to add some detail for my door, so I used a scrap piece of wood that I had laying around just to be a guide for me to draw a straight line right down the center of my door, and I used a pen to do this. I thought that the pen was going to work just fine, but I ended up not liking the way that that looked, so I used the rich black chalk paint, and I just used a really fine tip paintbrush, and I freehand painted right over top of that ink, and I really like the way that that looked a lot better. I'm then using some more of those strips of balsa wood, and I'm just going to be cutting pieces out to frame the door. I just placed the balsa wood on top of the area I wanted it to be at, and then I just marked it off with a utility knife and cut it out. This balsa wood is super duper thin and easy to cut, so it makes doing little intricate details really easy. And again, just continued measuring and cutting the balsa wood down to size to trim my door. Then once I had all the pieces cut out, I painted those with that same rich black paint. Then once the paint was all dry, I used hot glue to attach all of those wood trim pieces that I just made on top of the edges of my door. You can't have a door without having some door handles, so for the handles I'm using these really tiny scrap pieces of wood that were left over from all of the other wood that I just cut, and then I'm hot gluing them right on the front of my door. Then for the color, I just used a color that I had that looked kind of like bronzy, and this one is called Toasted Terracotta, and it is from Folk Art. I'm using one of these mini wreaths that I just recently picked up from Michael's, and I'm taking off the little checked bow at the top. If you want to leave that color on, you could, but I'm taking it off. I actually pulled the wreath apart while trying to remove it, but I just glued it back together with no worries. So I hot glued the wreath right above the door on my church, and then since I wanted this to be a little bit more rustic, I ended up just using a piece of jute and creating a really simple small bow, and then just hot gluing that at the very top of the wreath. And for the very last step in this project, I used hot glue on the bottom of my church to attach it to the base piece. And this is what my rustic church looks like all finished. I absolutely love how this one turned out. It does have a few extra steps, but if you guys have been following me for a while, then you know that I do like to add a lot of detail to my projects. For the first DIY in today's video, I'm going to be making a sign. I'm going to be using this small wooden piece, and this one came from a Dollar Tree Christmas craft kit that I just recently picked up, but I really wanted to use this piece for today's project. I'm then going to be using a smaller paintbrush to apply my folk art wood tint in the color walnut. By using this brush, I was really able to get in all of the little grooves of this wood piece. Once I have all of the stain or wood tint applied, then I'm just taking an old rag and wiping away the excess tint. For this project, I'm also using one of these 10-inch unfinished wood rounds from Hobby Lobby, and I'm painting this piece with my Waverly chalk paint in the color Plaster. Next, I'm using this old-fashioned sleigh ride stencil from Amazon, and I will have it linked down in my description box if you guys are interested in purchasing it. I'm just taking the stencil and getting it all centered onto my wood round, and then I'm using some painter's tape around all of the edges of the stencil to keep it nice and secure for when I'm painting. The color that I'm using to stencil on the words and then any images that are not the sleigh is from Folk Art in the color Rich Black. Once I got the top portion all stenciled on, I decided to go ahead and use some painter's tape over the sleigh so that I could keep that area white for now, because I'm going to be painting that red here in a minute, and I did not want to get any of the black colored paint in the areas that I'm going to be painting red. So once the paint was dry in the areas that I used the black paint, I'm just taking the painter's tape off, and then I'm using that same tape to just place over the words that are around the sleigh so that I don't get any of this red color on the areas that I just painted black. For the sleigh color, I'm using a Folk Art chalk paint in the color Imperial. Then once everything was all dry, I just removed the painter's tape and the stencil. Then I wanted to add a little bit of distressing to this piece, so I'm using my espresso colored chalk paint from Folk Art, and I'm very lightly dry brushing this around all of the edges, and then I'm also going to be going in up and down motions over top of the front of the sign as well. Next, I'm taking 2 of my tumbling tower blocks from Dollar Tree, and I'm using some hot glue to attach them together. Then I'm using that same plaster colored paint to paint them the same color as the round so that they match. And then I'm taking my round piece and just getting it centered in the middle slot of the piece that I stained in the beginning. And then I'm just using that tumbling tower pieces that I just glued together. I'm gluing those to the back of my larger round, and then also the wood piece at the bottom to hold it upright. This is what my sign looks like all finished. I love how it turned out. I think it is super cute. It was really easy and inexpensive to create, and I think it has a really good high-end look. Now moving into DIY number 2. For this one, I'm making a wood shim tree, and I'm using 8 wood shims. You can get these at Home Depot in a pack of 12 for just under $2. As you can see here, this shim is larger on one side and then it gets thinner on the other side. And the first thing I'm doing to these is I'm using my Folk Art wood tint in the color Walnut, and I'm just painting the stain on with a paintbrush and then wiping away the excess with a old rag. What's great about using a paintbrush is you can really get in all those grooves of the wood, since these are a little bit on the rough side. I'm also going to be using this small scrap piece of wood, and this measures 5 by 1.5 inches. And I'm doing the same thing. I'm using that same walnut wood tint, and I'm just painting it on and then wiping away the excess. Next, I'm attaching the wood shims together using some hot glue, but when I'm gluing it on, I'm placing it about 1 inch up from the bottom of the first shim so that it's kind of staggered. And then I'm just doing that with 2 more wood shims, so there's going to be 4 on each side. I'm doing 2 different ones like this since there's 8 shims total. As you can see, I'm leaving about an inch every single time I attach a wood shim on. So here's 4 of them together to make one side, and then I'm just continuing those same steps to do the other side, and I'm just making sure that I'm placing them the same as I did the first side. Now it's time to attach those pieces together, so I'm just taking the 2 side pieces, placing them on the bottom wood piece, and then I'm using hot glue on the bottom of the shim pieces to attach it to the bottom wood piece. And then to attach the very top wood shims into the point, I just used hot glue to attach the 2 pieces. I then laid out popsicle sticks to see exactly how many I needed to line the back of my tree, since I do want to have the back of the tree lined with wood, and it was 15 popsicle sticks. I'm then placing the sticks on top of the back side of the tree and then just marking with a pen where I need to cut them down, and I continued to do that until I had all of my popsicle sticks cut down to the size to fit the back of my tree. After I had all of the sticks cut down, I'm then painting each one of them with my plaster colored paint from Waverly, and then once they've all dried, I wanted to distress them a little bit, so I'm just going around all of the edges first with my espresso colored paint from Faux, and then I'm taking whatever is left over on my brush and just very lightly painting that on the middle of each stick. Next, it was time to attach those sticks to the back of my tree. So I just placed hot glue on the back of the wood shims and then placed the popsicle sticks on top of that with the painted side going towards the inside of the tree. Now that those are all attached, I'm going to be needing to make the base for my tree, and I'm using these 2 wood blocks. The larger one is 4 by 2 inches, and I'm just going to be using my folk art wood tint in the color walnut to give this a nice brown color stain. And then for the smaller 2 by 1 inch block, I'm painting this with my Waverly paint and plaster. Once the paint was dry, I wanted to add a distressed look to this piece as well, so I used that same espresso colored chalk paint to do that. Then I'm using 4 of these unfinished wood letters to spell out the word Noel, and I'm using the plaster colored paint to paint these. Next, I'm placing all of my letters to spell out Noel right on the front of my stained wood piece, just to get them centered before I start gluing them down. Once I have them all placed where I want them to be, I'm using hot glue on the back side to attach them. I'm then using some more hot glue to attach my white block piece to the center of my stained piece, and now this is my tree base. And then now I just need to attach the tree base to the actual wood shim tree, and again I just used hot glue to do that. Now for an accent piece that I want to add to the front of my tree, I'm going to be creating a wreath, and for this I'm using a 3-inch embroidery hoop that I had in my craft stash, and I'm painting it with my Spanish moss colored paint from Folk Art. For the greenery on my wreath, I'm going to be using these stems from Hobby Lobby. These are my favorite around Christmas time. I'm just cutting them down pretty small, and then I'm using some hot glue to attach the stems to the embroidery hoop. And then for each stem that I'm gluing on, I am just tucking it underneath the previous one that I glued on so that there's no gaps in between. And then I just continued to do that until I had them going all in the same direction around the wreath. I'm also going to be using these 2 mini bells that came off of one of these small little ornaments from Dollar Tree, and I just thought that they would be so cute in the middle of this wreath, but I did want to change the color, so I'm painting both of the bells with that rich black chalk paint from Folk Art. And then once the paint dried, I'm using a little bit of a gold colored paint to just kind of distress around the bell and make it look a little bit more vintage. So I used it around the edges, and then whatever was left over on the brush, I just very lightly painted that on. As you can see, some of the paint did come off and some of that silver color was poking through, but I ended up really liking how that looked, and it kind of went with that more vintage feel that I was going for anyways. I then strung both of the bells onto a piece of jute, and then I wrapped them around the top screw of my embroidery hoop and then just tied a knot on the back side. I'm also going to be creating a bow using this red and cream color ribbon that I got from Dollar Tree or Dollar General last year. I'm just making a really simple bow, and then I'm cutting the tail ends of the bow in a diagonal, and then I'm hot gluing that bow right at the top of my embroidery hoop above my bells. I'm then placing hot glue in the center of my wood shim tree to attach the embroidery hoop wreath. And this is what my tree looks like all finished. I love how this one turned out. It was super easy to create, even though it took a little extra time cutting the pieces for the backside of the tree. It was definitely worth it in the end. Next is DIY number 3, and for this one I'm creating pedestal bottle brush trees, and I'm using these 2 wood rounds, and these ones I got in a pack from Hobby Lobby, but they also sell them at Michael's and Joann's. I'm also going to be using these 2 smaller table legs, and I picked these ones up from Home Depot. As you can see here, the table legs do have a screw in the top of them. I tried unscrewing it, but I could not get either one of them out. So instead, I decided that I'm just gonna put a hole right in the center of the wood, and then I can just attach it that way. So here I'm using my drill to drill a hole right in the center of both of my rounds. And then I'm using that folk art wood tint in walnut, since it's my favorite, to stain both of these 2 pieces of wood. And then I'm also going to be using that same wood tint to stain both of my table legs. I then used hot glue inside the hole that I drilled and then a little bit around that area as well. I then placed the screw on the table leg in the hole and then just screwed the table leg all the way down on the wood round until the table leg couldn't turn anymore. And then that extra glue that was on there is just going to make sure that it is in a secure hold. I'm also going to be using 2 of these flocked bottle brush trees from Dollar Tree, and I did get them this year, but because I didn't want to have the bottom that was on the tree, I just used some pliers to cut that off. I'm then going to be drilling a hole right in the very top of my table leg, and then I'm placing hot glue inside that hole, and then with the little wire that's on the bottom of my bottle brush tree, I'm placing that inside of the hole. For a little bit of detail, I'm adding this Merry Christmas mini ornament that came from Walmart, and I'm using some jute wrapped around the table leg a few times, and then I'm attaching that mini ornament to the jute, and then just making sure that that's secure by tying a bow. And for my second tree, I'm using another one of these little mini ornament tags, and I'm attaching it the same way as I did the first one. And here are the pedestal bottle brush trees all finished. I love how these ones turned out. They were really easy to create, and you could switch up the table leg colors and be red and green if you wanted something a little bit more festive. Next is DIY number 4, and for this one I'm creating a sign, and I'm going to be using this unfinished wood sign from Hobby Lobby, and it is from the Woodpile brand. It's $9.99, but I always buy these pieces when they are 40 or 50% off. For the frame of my sign, I'm using a smaller paintbrush to apply the wood tint from Folk Art in the color Walnut, and I did stain the inside of the frame as well. I just used an even smaller paintbrush to apply it, and I did it in small sections so that I was extra precise. Then for the inside portion of my sign, I painted it with my Waverly paint in the color Plaster. For this project, I'm going to be using 2 of these wooden tree sets, and these did come from the Dollar Tree Christmas craft kits, and you can get 1 set of trees in each kit. And I'm just painting all of the tree portions with my Spanish moss color chalk paint from Folk Art, and then once the trees were painted, I needed to paint the bottom portion where it looks like snow mounds, and I'm using my plaster colored paint for those. I'm using that same plaster color around all of the edges of the tree so that it looks like there's snow on the trees. I then decided I wanted to have the back of this piece look rustic and distressed, so I'm using some of my espresso colored chalk paint on an old chip brush, and I'm just very lightly dry brushing that color along the entire back side of my sign. I ended up dry brushing a little bit of that espresso color around all of the snow on my trees as well, just because they looked a little bit flat when I placed them on my sign. I'm then going to be using this stencil that I picked up from Amazon, and I will have it linked down in my description box. I've used it in the past, but I love it so much that I'm using it again. I'm just getting it placed where I want it to be on my sign, and then I'm using some painter's tape around all of the edges to keep it nice and secure. And then I'm also placing some painter's tape on those trees because I am not going to be using those for this design. The color that I'm using for all of the wording is from Faux in the color Rich Black. I wanted to add just a little bit of detail to this sign, so I'm going to be using 6 of these unfinished wood stars from Hobby Lobby. I'm leaving them just like they are. I'm not painting them or staining them. I just loved this color with this particular sign, and I'm just hot gluing each one of the stars on top of all of the pine trees. And this is what the sign looks like all finished. Another really easy project. I ended up just having the beads on the top of the sign draped a little bit on the front because I thought they looked really great with the unfinished wood stars. Now moving into DIY number 5, I'm making a directional Christmas sign, and I'm going to be using this wood arrow sign that I got on clearance from Hobby Lobby a while back. The first thing I'm doing is just cutting off some of the ropes that held the sign together, and then once I have the bottom one cut off, I'm just using some pliers to pull the rope through all the rest of the staples. For 2 of the arrows, I painted them with my Tuscan red paint from Folk Art, but since it was a little bit more sheer, you could see through it, and I did have to do several coats of this on both of the arrows. But then once all the coats were dry, I thought it was a little bit too dark, so I ended up going in with my Imperial color to brighten it up a bit. Then for the remaining 2 arrows, I used the matte acrylic paint from Folk Art in the color olive green, and I did have to do several coats of this paint to get all of that wording covered up. I'm also going to be using a scrap piece of wood for this project, and this piece is 10 inches by 3.5 inches, and I'm using that same wood tint in the color walnut to stain this piece. For the base of my sign, I'm going to be using this square wood piece, and this one I believe is from Hobby Lobby, but you can get them at pretty much any craft store, and I'm staining it with that same walnut wood tint. Another piece of wood I'm going to be using for this project is this thicker piece here. This one I actually did get from Hobby Lobby, and it's 21.25 inches long, and I'm just using that same walnut wood tint once again to stain the piece. For all of the words that I'm using on my sign, I did do them on my Cricut and cut them out. This one here that says welcome to the North Pole, I will be just placing it on the stained piece of wood and just getting that all transferred. And I will have a link to all of the cut files down in my description box as well, in case you guys are interested in using them for your own signs. The second one I'm placing on one of the red colored arrows, just says Santa's Workshop. I then did the words Reindeer Games for the first green arrow, and then for the second red arrow, I did the saying Elf Village, and then for the second green one, I did the words Sleigh Rides. I wanted to add a little bit of color around all of the edges of my arrows, so I'm using that plaster color from Waverly, and I'm just very lightly painting it around all of the edges. And then I took a little bit on a Dollar Tree stencil brush, and I very lightly dry brushed that around all of the wording on all of the arrows. Next, I'm attaching the base piece with the longer wood piece using some hot glue, and then I'm just setting that down and getting all of my arrows and my sign placed exactly where I want them to be. Once I have them set out, then I'm just using some hot glue on the back side of each piece to attach it. For the last little detail on this piece, I'm using some of this greenery stems with berries from Hobby Lobby. I cut 2 little pieces of this out, and then I'm just going to be placing them on the top of the sign. I bent them a little bit since I do have a wire in them. It was really easy to bend, and then I just wrapped them around the left side of the sign, and then I did another one around the right side of the sign. And this is my directional sign all finished. I really love how this one turned out. Again, it was really easy to do, and I hope that you guys like it just as much as I do. Moving right along into the 6th and final DIY for today, I'm going to be making a wreath. I'm using this wreath form from Hobby Lobby, just removing the tag, and then I'm also going to be using some of these wood biscuits from Home Depot, and they are from the Ryobi brand. I'm first going to start by painting my entire wreath form with the Folk Art chalk paint in the color Spanish Moss. Next, I'm going to be hot gluing wood biscuits around my entire wreath form. I'm just gluing one side of the biscuit onto the wreath form with the other side sticking out, and they're all going to be going kind of in like a diagonal all the way around the wreath. Once I have them all glued on, I'm then going to be going back in with that Spanish moss colored paint and then just painting all of the biscuits. Next, I'm adding a second layer of wood biscuits over top of the first layer, and again, just using the hot glue to attach them, but I'm placing each top layer right over top of the first layer in between where the bottom layer of biscuits meet together. And then I'm going to be painting this top layer with that same Spanish moss colored paint. I then wanted to add what looks like snow around all of the biscuits, so I'm using my plaster colored paint to paint this around all of the edges of the biscuits, and then whatever was left over on my brush, I would paint in the center of the biscuits. To create my bow that's going to go on the wreath, I cut a piece of this burlap ribbon from Dollar Tree a few inches long, and then I cut another piece that was a little bit longer than the first piece. I'm then going to be hot gluing the ends of that ribbon together to form a circle, and I did that for both of the pieces of ribbon that I cut. I'm then cutting a third piece of this burlap ribbon, and this is going to be the tail ends for my bow. I just laid it out to the size that I wanted my tails to be and then cut it down to size. I then stacked my two pieces of ribbon that I had glued into circles, and then I'm wrapping a piece of jute around both of them and then just tying a knot on the back side. I'm then taking another piece of jute and then I'm finding where the center is on that third piece of ribbon that I cut, and then I'm just tying that off in a knot as well. I did leave the two jute ends that I had left over on my bow attached because I'm going to be using those to attach to my tail end pieces, but for the leftover jute that I have right here on this tail piece, I am going to be cutting those off. Now I'm taking my bow and placing right in the center of the tail end piece and then using those jute strands on the end of it to tie it together along the back side. Then for the ends of my tails, I did want them to be in a V shape, so I just folded those over and then cut them upward to form a V. I did want to add a little bit of a pop of color, so I'm cutting a strip of this burgundy and cream color fabric from Hobby Lobby, and then I'm making a really simple bow out of the fabric. For the tail ends of this bow, I did want them to have that same V shape, just like I did with my burlap bow, so I just folded the ends over and cut upward to form the V. Next, I'm attaching my burlap bow right at the top of my wreath, and then over top of that bow, I'm attaching my checked bow that I just created. I really wanted to add in some of these frosted berries that I recently got from Hobby Lobby, so I'm just taking some pliers and cutting off a few of these berries, and then I'm just going to be hot gluing them all around my bow. But before I started attaching them around my bow, I did end up adding some of these frosted or snow-covered, well, they're not actually snow-covered, but what looks like snow-covered pine cones, and then once I had the pine cones attached, I just glued the berries around that, and I really love how they look. These are probably my new favorite picks from Hobby Lobby right now. For the very last step, I ended up adding a jute hanger along the back side. And this is what my wood biscuit wreath looks like all finished. I know you guys really enjoyed the wood biscuit tree I made in my last video, so I wanted to add another project using them, and I really love how this one turned out. For the first project in today's video, I'm using this wooden tool caddy that I picked up from Goodwill. I paid just under $6 for it. And the first thing I'm doing is just painting it with my Waverly chalk paint in the color Ivory. I did do a few coats of this paint, and I also made sure to paint the inside of the caddy as well. After that paint was dry, I'm then using my espresso chalk paint on a chip brush, and I'm just dry brushing this color over top of the entire caddy to give it more of a rustic look. Then for the front of the caddy, I created this Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas decal on my Cricut. I will have a link to it down in the description box if you guys are interested in cutting it out yourself. And I'm just getting it centered and transferred on the front of the caddy. If you guys don't have a cutting machine, you can always just hand write this on with some really pretty markers or use stickers or wood letters. Next, I'm using some of this floral foam from Dollar Tree and I'm just placing it inside of the caddy. And I did have to cut it down just a little bit so that I could get all of the pieces fit inside of the caddy. For the inside, I'm going to be using some of this really pretty pine greenery from Hobby Lobby. I'm also going to be using some random greenery pieces that I had left over in my Christmas floral stash. I believe some of them came off of an old wreath. So I like to just use a combination of different colors of greens, and for this I'm just going to be cutting them off of their stems and then placing them inside of the floral foam. I started by placing the greenery from Hobby Lobby inside first, and then I just built it up with the other greenery pieces from there. Once I had them all spaced out and the way I wanted the green to look, then I moved on and used some of these like iced berries, also from Hobby Lobby, and I just cut them off of their stems and then placed them all around inside of the greenery for a pop of color. I thought it would look really pretty if I added some lights around all of the greenery. I was going to use the pack that I just showed you from Dollar Tree, but I opened them up and they actually didn't work. So I'm just using some other ones that I had on hand. These ones, I kind of wish that the wires were a little bit more dainty or green, but like I said, this is what I had on hand, and the other ones that I had purchased for this project did not work. So here I'm just wrapping the lights around all of the greenery, and then this is what it looks like all finished. I think this turned out so beautiful. It was really easy to do and it looks really pretty lit up at night. Next is a DIY number 2. For this one, I'm using this framed piece from Hobby Lobby. I actually painted it back in the fall and did not like the way it looked. I did not want this frame to go to waste, so today I'm just going to be painting over it to create a Christmas project. For the inside of the frame, I'm using my Imperial Color chalk paint from Folk Art, and I did do 2 coats of this paint. Then for the outside frame portion, I'm using my rich black chalk paint from Folk Art. Then once that paint was all dry, I'm using my ivory colored paint and I'm just painting that around all of the edges of the frame just to give them a little bit more dimension and more of a distressed look. I'm also going to be using 8 of these gift tags that came from Hobby Lobby, and I'm just going to be removing all of the jute hangers that are around all of the tags because I will not be needing them for this project today. I'm then painting the front and the back of all of the tags with my Waverly paint in the color Ivory. After that paint was dry, I used some of my rich black chalk paint around all of the edges of the tags to give them a little bit of distressing and just to make the edges pop a little bit more. Next, I'm going to be putting these number decals that I cut out on my Cricut on all of my tags. Now, if you don't have a cutting machine, don't worry. Dollar Tree has sticker numbers that look almost exactly like this, and those are a great option. Now, for this first tag, I'm doing the front and back, and it's going to be on the front side 0, on the back side 1, and then I'm going to be doing one single tag with just the number 2 on it. And this is going to be for like one side of the numbers that I'm doing for my countdown to Christmas. Then I'm going to be doing an entire second set of numbers that are numbered 0 through 9. And again, I'm doing the front and back of the tags. So it'll be a tag with 0 and 1 on it, a second tag with 2 and 3, and then so on and so on. I hope that makes sense. Next, I'm going to be getting this Days Until Christmas decal centered and transferred at the very top of my sign. If you guys are interested in the cut file, I will have it linked down in my description box. If you don't have a cutting machine, again, you can use some really pretty paint pens to write this on your sign. Next, I'm putting the tags on my sign, just making sure that they're centered and everything looks correct before I just mark in the top holes of the tags where I'm going to be wanting to make holes in the back of my sign with my drill. Now that I have my spots all marked off, I'm just using my drill to drill holes for my little hangers that I'm going to be adding later on. So these are the ones that I chose to use. I really loved this like goldish bronzy color to them. I did get them from Michael's. And then I'm just taking them and screwing them into the holes that I just drilled out. And they actually worked perfectly. You can get different sizes, but I went with these larger ones since my tags are a little bit larger. Then I'm just placing my tags onto the hooks. You could leave the sign finished just like that, but I wanted to add some detail. So I'm using 2 sets of these bell ornaments from Dollar Tree, and I removed the little greenery that was on the tops of the bells, and then I'm also removing the little tag that holds the bells together. I then painted all 4 of my bells with my raw sienna acrylic matte paint from Faux. I did do 2 really messy coats of this paint. I wanted the bells to have a little bit of texture to them and for them to look kind of old. Then once that paint was dry, I went in with my espresso colored chalk paint and just dry brushed this color over all of the bells to give them more of that old distressed look. Then to add a little bit of detail, I'm using some of this pine greenery from Hobby Lobby, and I'm hot gluing it in the top corners of both sides of my sign. Then once I have that added, I'm then hot gluing the bells that I painted over top of the greenery. And then I wanted to add a little bit more of a lighter green color, so I'm using some of these greenery pieces that I had in my craft stash. I'm cutting a few small pieces off and then just gluing those at the very top of the bells. And then to add a little bit more detail, I'm using a strand of jute to create a really small bow, and then I'm hot gluing that at the very top of my bells. And again, I did this for both sides of my sign. And here is my Days Until Christmas sign all finished. I love how this one turned out. To me, this looks like an item that you could purchase in a store. It was super easy to create, and I know that I'll be using it for years to come. Next, we're moving on to DIY number 3. For this one, I'm going to be using this unfinished wood crate that I picked up from Hobby Lobby. And the first thing I'm doing for this one is painting it with my Imperial Color chalk paint from Faux. And I am doing the entire piece in this color. I'm then using 2 of these dowel rods from Dollar Tree, and I'm going to be painting them with my rich black chalk paint from Faux. I did end up using a 3rd dowel, and I forgot to show that, but I did the same thing with it. I just painted that with the rich black colored paint as well. I'm then using 4 of these wooden wheels. These are also from Hobby Lobby, and I'm using that same rich black paint to paint all 4 of the wheels. And then I'm using 1 of these tumbling tower blocks from Dollar Tree, and I'm also painting that with that same black colored chalk paint. I ended up cutting a really tiny piece off of one of the wooden dowels, and this is going to be the little handle on the wagon that I'm creating, and again using that same black colored paint. For this project, I'm also going to be using 4 of these unfinished wood caps. These are from Hobby Lobby, and I'm going to be using these for the center of my wheels, and I'm using my ivory colored paint from Waverly to paint the tops of all 4 of the caps. Next, I can start putting everything together. I'm taking my dowels and then I'm just pushing the wheels onto the ends of my dowels. I did one end first, and then for the second end, when I put the dowel on, I just kept putting it onto the bottom of the crate and then just pushing the wheel on more and more until I finally had it to where when I put it on the crate, it was tight and there was no gaps away from the edges of the crate and the wheels. And again, I did that for the second dowel and the second set of wheels. Then it was time to attach the dowels and the wheels to the bottom of the crate. So I just moved the dowel over a little bit, placed hot glue on the bottom of the crate, and then put the dowel back into place. And I did that for both of the dowels and the wheels. I used hot glue on the back side of all of my wooden caps to attach them to the center of all 4 of my wheels. I'm then using some hot glue on the bottom of my tumbling tower block to attach it to the bottom of my crate, like you can see me doing here. Then I'm going to be attaching that 3rd dowel that I had painted right onto the tumbling tower block and the very top part of my wagon. Then once I have that attached, I just need the little scrap piece that I had painted, and this is going to be the handle for my wagon, and I'm attaching that with some hot glue. I'm also using this small rectangle piece of scrap wood, and I'm painting it with my ivory colored chalk paint. Then once that paint was dry, I'm getting this freshly cut Christmas trees decal centered and transferred onto the piece of wood. This is a Cricut Designs base design. I did not create this one, but I will have a link to it down in my description box. I did want this sign to be framed at the top and bottom, so I'm using one of these balsa wood strips that I got in a pack from Hobby Lobby. I'm measuring it to the size that I need, and then I'm just cutting it with some scissors. This balsa wood is very, very thin and is easy to cut with scissors. Once I had one piece cut, I then used that to just measure my second piece and then cut that down to size. I'm then using my folk art wood tint in the color walnut to stain both pieces of wood. I'm then using hot glue on the back side of the strips of wood to attach them at the very top and the bottom of my sign. Now that I have my sign all made, I'm attaching it to the very front side of my wagon. I'm going to be using 5 bottle brush trees from Dollar Tree in this project. I just removed the little snow bottoms that were on all of the trees. They're really easy to just pull off. And then once I had those all off, I did want to add some lights around all of these trees. I am using some of these wired lights from Dollar Tree. I just wrapped them around each tree as I was placing it inside of the crate. And what's really great about this project, it's super easy to hide the little battery pack for the lights. It just wraps it up and stuck it under the tree, and you wouldn't even know that it was inside. This is what the project looks like all finished. It is so super cute, really easy to do, and I just love how this is lit up and it looks really cute at night. Moving right along into the fourth and final DIY for today, I'm using one of these unfinished wood frame pieces from Hobby Lobby. And the first thing I'm doing is taking my folk art wood tint in the color walnut, and I'm just painting this wood tint on and then using an old rag to wipe away the excess tint. I did do the back side of this piece as well so that it looks completely finished. And then I'm using some of this plaid paper. This one I think is from Hobby Lobby, and I placed it on the front of the frame, and then I just kind of bent the paper over where I need to cut so that it will fit inside of the frame. Once my paper was all bent, I'm just using some scissors to cut it out. Then I'm using some Mod Podge on the back inside portion of this frame piece, and then once I have the Mod Podge all applied, I'm then placing my cut plaid paper right over top of that, and then just pressing out any of the bubbles and making sure that the paper is flat. I have already printed out this Silent Night music sheet. It is a free printable, and I will have a link to it down in my description box exactly where I got it from. And then I just printed it on like a yellow colored piece of cardstock, and then here I'm just cutting it out, and I did size it down to 5 by 7. I'm then applying some of my Mod Podge on the back of my music sheet, and then I'm taking that and just placing it in the center of the plaid paper that I've already applied. I'm making sure to press out any bubbles, and then I did end up having to use a little bit of extra glue on the edges just because this was a piece of cardstock. It was a little bit harder to get to lay down flat. You can see that when I'm adding this jute around all of the edges of my music sheet, some of the paper is a little bit crinkled, but the paper was still wet while I was doing this. I did not wait for it to completely dry down, but once the paper dried down, it laid flat. So here you can see I'm just adding the jute around the music sheet with some hot glue. Next, I'm going to be creating my own wreath with some of this like greenery strand garland. I'm not really sure what this is called, but I did get it from Hobby Lobby. I just wrapped it around twice to the size of the wreath that I need because I do want to double it up, and then I cut that with my pliers. And then I'm just taking the two edges or the two ends of the greenery, and then I'm just wrapping them around each other together to make sure that I have that circle shape and it stays in the circle shape. I'm then using some of this burlap ribbon with some gold trim on the edges from Dollar Tree. I'm wrapping it around the very top of my wreath, and then I'm taking that ribbon and pulling it over the very top of my frame, and then the ends of the ribbon I'm securing on the back side of the frame with some hot glue. Next, I'm making a bow. I'm using the same ribbon and I wrapped it around my two fingers twice. I'm then taking the end of that ribbon and pushing it through the very bottom of the strands of ribbon between my fingers, and then pulling this strand up and over my two fingers and then putting it through the bottom loop and then pulling it tight to create my bow. I then removed the bow from my fingers, shaped the bow a little bit so that it looked nicer, and then for the ends, I just cut those in a diagonal shape. For the very last step, I hot glued my bow right to the very top center of my wreath. And this is what the project looks like all finished. Another really easy and affordable Christmas decor project. For DIY number 1, I'm making a pinecone wreath. For this one, I'm using an 8-inch wreath form from Dollar Tree, and I'm going to be using the back side of the wreath form as the front side of my wreath. And I'm also using some of these pine cones that I picked up from Hobby Lobby. What I first started doing was just laying out all of my pine cones onto my wreath form to see exactly how I want them to be before I start attaching them. And what I ended up doing was doing a large pine cone, then right next to that one I would do a smaller one, then a larger one, then a smaller one, and just switch those up all the way around the wreath form. Once I had it all figured out how I wanted to have them placed, then I started attaching them to my wreath form. And to do that, I'm just placing hot glue on the back side of each pine cone and then pressing it down onto the wire wreath form. After I had all of my pine cones attached to the front of my wreath, I then started attaching some of this greenery that I picked up from Hobby Lobby. This is part of their Christmas florals, and it's already pulled off of the stem because my son got a hold of it in the car and decided to just pick it all apart. I did end up cutting each little piece of greenery down so that they were shorter for me to place in between each pine cone. And to attach them, I just placed some hot glue on the ends of each stem and then just pressed those down in between each cone. After I had that greenery attached all the way around, I'm then flipping my wreath over, and now I'm going to be attaching that same greenery on the back side of each pine cone so that I have the greenery going all the way around the wreath and not just in between the cones, which I wish I would have just placed the greenery on the wreath form before I put on the pine cones, but I didn't, so I'm doing it this way. But if you are going to make this wreath, just keep that in mind that you can just do the greenery first and then do the pine cone on top of the greenery, maybe just to save yourself this extra step. Next, I'm going to be adding a second kind of greenery to my wreath. I really love this one because it has the white tips on it, and I think by adding the second kind, it's just really going to add so much more to my wreath. And to attach it, I'm doing the same thing I did with the other. I'm just cutting it down a little bit to make it fit better, and then just hot gluing it in between each pine cone. This, I believe, is either from Joann Fabrics or Michaels, and I did get it last year. But usually they have the same things every year or very similar, so you should be able to pick something up similar pretty much anywhere. I guess you could probably get stuff like this at Dollar Tree as well. But once I had all of it attached in between each pine cone, I wanted to place it on the inside too to cover up some of that wire that you could see from my wreath form. And again, just did it the same way as I did the other ones, just cut it down and hot glued it going all the way along the inside of the wreath form. Originally, I was going to use one of these black and red buffalo check bows from Dollar Tree on the very top of my wreath, but I ended up not using it because I thought this wreath just needed to be a little bit more simple. So what I ended up doing was just adding a piece of jute to the very top as my hanger. And here is my pinecone wreath all finished. I absolutely love how this one turned out. And what was even better, it is super affordable to create, and I'm going to be able to use it all through winter, not just with my holiday decor. And that was all 40 of my favorite Christmas decor DIYs. I hope that I was able to give you some inspiration for this coming holiday season. If you enjoyed today's video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up. If you're not subscribed, I hope that you will consider subscribing, and don't forget to hit the notification bell so that you don't miss out on any of my future videos. Thank you so much for watching.